Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Do Good to Lead Well webinar series. My name is Craig Dowden, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. Really excited about this conversation. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. And so to set the stage, for those of you who have returned, welcome back. It's great to have you with us. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your hectic days to join us for what's sure to be a thought-provoking and incredibly valuable conversation. For those of you who are new and coming in for the first time, a heartfelt welcome as well. It's great to have you with us. And to give a little bit of context, love to provide the context. So where this Do Good to Lead Well series came from was in advance of my first book, Do Good to Lead Well. In my day-to-day activities, I have the profound pleasure to speak with top CEOs and best-selling authors. And so I wanted to create a community where people could have an opportunity to be a part of that conversation. And then a couple of years ago, when COVID came upon us, really expanded that and welcomed in top CEOs and best-selling authors. So over the last couple of years, I've interviewed over 70 amazing global thought leaders who have been able to share their experiences and their insight. So I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Dr. Stefanie Johnson to the Do Good to Lead Well webinar series this morning. So she is the director of the Doer Institute for New Leaders at Rice University. So I'm really excited to hear more about that, as well as the Wall Street Journal bestselling author of Inclusify. And I've got my copy right here, and I cannot emphasize enough for you to go out and grab your copy. I'll be able to flip through any page and you'll see old school highlighting there. So absolutely packed with great information. She holds a PhD from Rice University, and she's especially interested in the effects of unconscious biases in the evaluation of women and minorities, with the goal of finding ways to mitigate those biases. And I think that's absolutely spectacular and so timely and so important, and really looking forward to digging into that with her. She has published over 70 journal articles, book chapters, and outlets like Harvard Business Review, Journal of Applied Psychology, the Academy of Management Journal, so the top tier publications. She's been featured in media outlets like The Economist, Newsweek, Time, and CNN. Her book was endorsed by top thought leaders, so Adam Grant, Marshall Goldsmith. So just her work is respected everywhere. And what's best is she's kindly agreed not only to spend some time with us today, but also to take questions from the live audience. So Stefanie, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to the Do Good to Lead Well series.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation. I love the title of your first book, and I love the title of the series. It's just so aligned with my views on the world and what leadership kind of should and shouldn't be.
Well, what I love is, I have to say, there's so, with an hour, we have an hour, and again, it's very kind. There are so many points in the book where I was going, oh, this is so awesome. This is absolutely fantastic. And your that kindred approach on this, I couldn't agree more. And please, for everybody who's tuning in, because I'm really excited to ask questions, please take advantage to talk to one of the top experts in the world in this topic. And so one thing that I think is really fascinating, and you've just started this position, and it's for the Institute for New Leaders out of Rice University, the Doer Institute. So that just sounds awesome. So can you talk a little bit more about the program and what it is? I'm really excited to hear about it.
Yes, thank you for asking. I'm so excited to be here. This is, it's really my dream job. Very few people get to do a PhD at an institution and then come back and be a professor at that institution. It's kind of like this, that never gets to happen, right? You never get to go home again. And I'll say, when I was a student here, I always remember this being kind of the best time of my life was when I was a student at Rice, which is terrible because I've had a great life. I have kids, they're the best part of my life, but intellectually, it was just so explosive for me. And that's how it's been coming back and being able to pass that on to others, because primarily what we do as the Ann and John Doer Institute for New Leaders is try to create the next generation of leaders from our rice owls. So we provide coaching, more traditional classroom-based leadership training, and other development opportunities for our undergrad and graduate students here. We're actually just getting like in the swing of things right now as students have come back, and this week have some really exciting things planned for our new coaches. So we use a lot of executive coaches that we pair with our students to take them through their own leadership journey. And so they're coming on campus this week. So it's just like, you know, it's amazing to be on a college campus over the summer because it's like kind of quiet. And then when everyone gets back here, it's just alive with activity and excitement.
Mm. Well, congratulations. Sounds like a fantastic program, and I love, as you say, it's such a rarity to be able to come back, and it's just speaks volumes in terms of yourself and what you've accomplished and how important it is. And within the book, there's so many examples of great studies. Not just you have a wealth of insight about the research that's been conducted, and I love how passionate you are about conducting your own research programs and agendas. So let's talk a little bit. And again, this is a fantastic, I thoroughly enjoyed it from start to finish, and not just the messaging, the evidence base, and the practical insights. Can you share with us what was your motivation behind writing Inclusify?
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned, Craig, that I'm super interested in how leaders' identities shape how they're viewed. And I think, you know, unconscious bias and the biases that we hold have an impact on the way we view leaders, but also the way leaders lead others. And I spent a lot of time studying that, sharing those insights with companies and putting them into practice and really creating kind of evidence-based practices that leaders can use to increase diversity. And there's all these great outcomes if you believe the data that shows that when you increase diversity on teams, you get really great outcomes like innovation, higher productivity, greater engagement. You're more likely to capture new target markets, right? All these great things. And there were certainly companies that I worked with where they did all the things and they successfully recruited the very best talent. I was a diverse group of people. They're really excited and they had higher turnover, greater conflict. They didn't get the innovation, and they're kind of like, what gives, right? We did all the things. And it occurred to me that at the time, like, you have to make sure that your environment's inclusive, right? Like, how are people arriving? What are they arriving into? And at the time, there just wasn't a lot of research or resources about what does that even mean to make an inclusive work environment, and why is it so important that when you recruit top talent that they enter into an environment where everyone can be successful. And so that's really where Inclusify came from, was just this need for a conversation around what can you do to make your team more inclusive. And so there's a lot of research, like you said, and a lot of stories, but it's really just like a lot of practical tips.
And there's so much that resonates with me on that, and in particular, and that's a passion of mine. That was why I wanted to get in and pursue the postgraduate work myself. Like, what's the evidence-based practice? What are the lessons we can learn from research? And they are so compelling, and then share that, and then rather than it being some esoteric, ambiguous, so, well, what is this idea? Sounds great. How do we translate it into practice? And another piece that I really love is the title is great, and then you also say the power of uniqueness and belonging to build innovative teams. And that, so for some people, they might uniqueness and belonging, like, how do those two things go together? So I love that you delve into those ideas. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think if you think about when I started writing the book, there was this big trend to focus on belonging. It was, headlines in Medium and Quartz and Forbes, like the popular business press, saying It's not just diversity, it's not just inclusion. We need belonging. We need everyone to feel like they belong. And that's right, and I think that there's a reason why that became really popular really quickly. It's something we can all really relate to. Like, you probably at some point, I'm going to go on a limb here and say you felt at a time in your life that you didn't belong, maybe. And it's like horrible, right? Like, it's like that, you never want to go back to that time. And so when you can evoke that emotion in people of like, well, what does it feel like when people don't belong? And, it can really challenge people to be more inclusive. And so that's why belonging's in there. However, having worked with a lot of companies, and maybe it's more true in like finance and tech that have really strong like culture fit models, they want everyone to belong, and they make people kind of fit in or encourage people to fit in. They hire on culture fit and then try to reinforce that so that there's a feeling of belonging. That really negates the idea that not everyone fits in that culture. And so you have a lot of people who are changing who they are to fit in, and that's where the uniqueness part comes from. And it's actually a classic psychology theory called optimal distinctiveness theory. And the idea is that, at least for humans, so that's like most of us, right, that there's two basic and essential needs that we have. And one is belonging. Like, we are a species that has to feel interconnected to others. We're a social species, right? We want to belong. But unlike maybe other animals, we also really focus on our uniqueness. It's like, we want to belong, but only insofar as we can belong while being our true and authentic selves. And so when people talk about belonging, some of them say, belonging while you can be yourself. I just kind of use the optimal distinctiveness model, and there's this great scholar, Lynn Shore, who really popularized this idea that they're actually two separate things. Like, you can do uniqueness really well and not have a culture where there's belonging, and you can do belonging and everyone has to fit in. They can't be their unique selves. But to really create an inclusive environment, you want both the uniqueness and belonging. Otherwise, you don't get the benefits of having diverse perspectives if people can't bring those unique perspectives to bear.
And that's what I love about it, is that throughout the thread throughout is really around, hey, how can we honor? And I love how you frame it about honoring who we are, being true to that, and then also being part of that collective, and those two ideas. And then, as you say, they can be a tension. We can create some issues there. And it's wonderful how, rather than seeing them as competing forces, like, these are beautiful, you bring them together in this incredible environment, that secret sauce, the safety and connection and relationships that you talk about throughout the book is just so wonderful. I've got a question already, and I'm really excited. So Tanya was wondering around unconscious bias, trying to really being mindful of our biases. And so one of the things she struggled with is people say, well, how can I know what I'm, A, they say they're not biased, or B, well, how can I know something that's unconscious? So do you have any advice about how to deal with with those naysayers?
Yeah, so dealing with the naysayers, I ask this question, like, how could it be unconscious if we talk about it so often, right? Like,
Right.
it wouldn't be conscious at that point. But the idea is the way that your biases impact your behavior is operating below conscious level. So, what unconscious bias is just a paired association that you might have between two things. And so if you think of a nurse, like, if you're picturing a nurse, a lot of people will picture a woman. You also picture the scrubs, right? But when you picture a surgeon, maybe you're more likely to picture a man. You still get scrubs, but maybe they're green, or I don't know. And so the unconscious bias becomes problematic when someone walks into your hospital room and you say, nurse, can you please call the surgeon? And that is your surgeon, right? And so those are like, they come across like tiny cuts against people who might not be the prototypical person in that role. And then it actually unfolds into affecting things in a deeper level, like how they're treated even by their colleagues. So how do you know well, you can go through the thought exercise, at least in your work of, what is your prototype for whatever role that you're looking for, and name it. And so you become aware that that's what your bias is, and then explore the ways it could affect the way you might treat people or judge a potential candidate or choose who you should nominate for a promotion or something like that. If that doesn't seem like enough, there's a great website that Harvard has. It's called Project Implicit, or the Implicit Associations Test. You can go on there, and it's a reactions time test, and it tells you what biases you might hold. There's other opportunities. There's a study that said you can actually figure this out pretty quickly if you go through a thought experiment where you imagine yourself having dinner with a group of 12, let's just say, whatever it might be. So picture yourself, Craig, at a dinner with 12 women, and how would you experience that? Or 12 Muslim Americans, or whatever it might be. And that is like a pretty good indication. You could do the reaction time test, but you'll probably actually know how you feel if you really go through the work of thinking about it. Now, if you spend a lot of time in an environment where it's you and your 12 best gal pals, you would probably think, oh yeah, I think it would be totally normal. It would feel great. It would feel like Tuesday, right? In which case you probably don't have strong unconscious bias against that group. And in fact, that the contact hypothesis, or the idea that just spending more time with a group who has a different identity than you reduces bias. There's good support for that. Having strong personal relationships with people further reduces the bias. Seeing people in specific roles, like if those women are your church group but not your work group, you still might have biases at work. But I think you could, even though they're unconscious, like you can actually bring up the consciousness just by really thinking through it. That's a really long answer, but I'm gonna bring it all home to say, and for all of that, I don't really know that it matters. I think instead I would focus on your behavior and finding systems and structures to negate whatever bias you might have. And so that if the system is really foolproof to select, promote, retain the best people because you remove the potential for bias to impact decision making, then it doesn't really matter if you didn't go through an exercise for one group or do the project implicit. You're still going to make better decisions.
Well, I love
That's
that.
a really long answer. For Tanya, did that answer?
It was great. No, and thank you. Great answer. And one of the things, and something I want to comment on as well, because I think one of the things I most enjoyed above and beyond the content was that there were throughout the book, I paused and there were thoughtful reflections and didn't feel bad about it. And I think that's really powerful. So kudos, because I think sometimes part of the challenge can be, okay, is there going to be a strong reaction? And I felt throughout the book that there were exercises, questions that you would prompt to say, hey, think about this. And it wasn't in a way, it was really in a growth situation. And as an example, I love how you made the connection between, okay, well, differences between an association versus an attitude as an example. I was like, oh, that is fascinating. Another exercise that I thought was great. Can you talk to people around tailwind? I thought that was really to get us to, again, better appreciate, because we can talk about it, yet when it comes to, okay, what are some concrete things I can do, I think people would really resonate with that. So
yes, I read this great book that was written by Dolly Chugg, and she has this exercise, and so I cite her and share the exercise to think about in life your own personal, she uses the phrase headwinds and tailwinds, and so it's like things that might have propelled you forward, made you more successful because you lucked out, right? Those are your tailwinds, and things that may have stood in your way that you had to overcome, and those are your headwinds, they slow you down. And the analogy is based on the idea that if you're flying from LA to New York, it takes like, what, 4.5 hours? If you fly from New York to LA, in 4.5 hours, you've only hit Denver because there's just a lot more headwinds going that direction. And so there's things that slow you down or, maybe speed you up. And so if you can at least think of that and admit that there may have been things that helped propel you along. And this seems like, of course, right? But then I shared the story in the book. Like, so a lot of people feel really uncomfortable with this concept of like, you were lucky because, like, I don't want to identify you, but I'm going to suggest that I think you're probably identify as a man and white Canadian.
That's right.
Maybe those are things that you can say might have been things that helped you along, but people can find that really threatening because you're like, actually, I worked really hard for what I've accomplished. Like, you can't sum me up as just an average Canadian, right? Like, I worked really, really hard to get where I am. And so I experience that a lot where people kind of push back and say, I think it's often when it's used in the term, it's like privilege. But when you say it as like, these might have been your tailwinds, like maybe it's, yeah, we can all have it. And so I'm saying all this just to say that then I was put on the spot and someone asked me about my privilege. And even though I'm like, we all have, headwinds and tailwinds, when I was put on the spot, I'm like, I worked really hard. Like, I'm Mexican-American, woman, first generation college student. My parents didn't have any money. Like, I am still paying off my college loans, right? And then you have to pause for a second and say like, oh, right, this is the feeling that people have, is you want to point out that you also have worked really hard and overcome things. And so that's why I like to do them both together, to recognize that there's certainly tons of privilege and tailwinds that I've had in life. And there's other things that might have slowed me down. And so if I can recognize that in myself, I can see it in others, and it can be the foundation for empathy and understanding that people just had different paths to get where they are.
Well, and I love, and one of the things, and you've just articulated so wonderfully, is around, rather than seeing it as an either or. So, well, this is why, well, you can work hard and you can have tailwinds, and both of those are true at the same time. And so I think, and what I love is you're challenging us. That's what I took away, is that you challenge us to expand our thinking, to ask ourselves some uncomfortable questions, yet in a safe way. Because I think if we are really and love the spirit, and as you say, within the new leader program, how to have a positive impact on the world, it's necessary to ask ourselves those tough questions. It's necessary to dive into our own biases and our own topics of discomfort in order to advance things. That's what we're truly passionate about. I've got another question. I don't. Go ahead.
Oh, no, that's great. Go for it.
So another amazing question from Tara. So their organization is looking at really building a diverse and inclusive environment, and yet from a hiring standpoint and onboarding, so wanting to do the best that they can. Any advice about ways in which they can appropriately assess talent, bring in talent? Recognize it's a big question, but any guidance, would love to have.
Yeah, so much. So I think that's often where most organizations start, is with selection, because you have really talented HR people. You can say, we want to select for X, Y, or Z, and that they can make that happen, right? So it makes a lot of sense to start there. Of course, we want to make sure that you maximize on retention too, because if you are able to attract and select really top talent, you don't want them to just turn around and leave within the year, which we've seen extraordinary numbers for turnover. So you kind of got to do both, and right, like make sure there's a great environment when they're coming in. But for recruitment, I think there's a couple big things. Like, look where you're recruiting. If you have typically used these platforms for recruitment and gotten a certain type of talent, and you keep using those, you're probably gonna get the same type of talent. And so as they try to expand that, maybe even looking to like related fields that might be more diverse. Look at your recruitment materials, and do they reflect the type of community that you're trying to hire, or do they, maybe I'm not saying be like disingenuous, but like maybe it's the aspirational group that you're hoping to bring in, and then look for points of potential bias. I have a bunch of resources on my website at drstefjohnson.com. There's like a recruitment how to select diverse talent guide, but you can consider using anonymized resumes. So remove names from resumes that take away some of the biases you might have around gender or even ethnicity, and just based on the sound of the name. Really consider some of the standards for hiring that you are using. So, probably the most common is like a college degree. You have to have a college degree to this job. But do you really, right? Or even like what schools you tend to recruit from. Does it need to be those schools? Or maybe could you actually be selecting, more diverse and higher talent from if you dropped some of those requirements? Like some of the biggest tech companies like Facebook, I think, and Google have dropped the college degree requirement because it gets tough to attract top talent, and maybe it's check mark, but and it goes for other things too. Like there's often things in our MQs, like our minimum qualifications or nice to haves, that maybe people can learn on the job. Like maybe they don't need to have had those certain like years of experience. I was working with an organization that was trying to attract IT professionals with a certain amount of experience, and they couldn't get people. But if you have the college degree requirement, do you really need that level of experience? There's probably trade-offs. So I think some of those things, just to get people in, look at your interviewers. You can, hopefully do some unconscious bias training. There's not really strong evidence that unconscious bias training makes a ton of difference, but bring some awareness to the biases that people might have. Ensure that your interview panels reflect a diverse population and who you're trying to attract. And then another big thing is in interviews, I've been really for the idea of asking people what they've done to promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, whatever terms you use. And if they can't say anything, and I can tell you, like a lot of my college students have had this question in interviews. If they've done nothing, that I don't do anything I don't care about it. It's not a thing for me. Like, then if you're trying to create an inclusive environment, then maybe you should hire people who work to promote inclusion or have some evidence that they care about this issue. And then, I think, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, because I could go on all day. Like, you need to call me. Okay, we can talk about this. But is really think about the onboarding process and the messages that are communicated in that process, because I haven't seen a lot of organizations that really invest in inclusion at that moment. But if you think about it, that's when people are really learning about what's important to the culture and to success in the organization. And so if you're not talking about diversity and inclusion, even though you just invested a ton of effort in that for your recruitment, if it doesn't show up in onboarding, like they don't know how important it is to you. So I'd start, really reinforcing that. And for people who, maybe they didn't have that experience or not particularly inclusive, to ensure that they know the cultural expectations for how you're going to treat each other and, create a culture of trust and respect, or whatever words you use to describe that for your own organization. So before people get off to the wrong start, like you really want to set them up for success. And that's that onboarding experience is like the only time to really do that.
Well,
do you think did I miss anything, Craig? What would you add?
I just got, wow, that was, I'm so glad I asked that question. Is what I got in all caps. So, and I will certainly share those resources. I think that's fabulous, and thank you. And it's so interesting. What I think is so powerful is that you challenge us to, well, ask the question, like, do we really need, what makes us feel like this is relevant, and then how is this going to land? And it's and I love how you then, rather than talk about it in more abstract terms, you're like, hey, let's define this. So one example, a CEO that I've worked with, they shared what they were recognizing when they removed the address and postal code of applicants, then their diversity numbers went up significantly, because what was
Oh,
happening was,
wow.
yeah, and just not even realizing it, right? And then, hey, look at that. So it's what I love of what you're talking about is how do we operationalize things so that, and be aware, and that anonymizing of assessments, so that we can, when the candidate comes in, how are we truly evaluating them and being mindful of the potential biases or assumptions that we're going to bring. So absolutely love.
Yes.
I've got
And I
another
think,
question from Todd, who is, one of the things we're looking to bring more diversity into our organization, and yet there's this internal discussion at the executive table about, well, don't want to feel like, well, we're giving preferential, or it's the best person for the job. And so how do you reconcile or have the person feel like, well, you're getting special treatment? So what do we do?
ah,
Any advice for us so we can handle that as best we can?
yes, so much. So, I was going to add one more thing on the previous question that it relates to this question is doing a targeted recruitment as well. So like, I'm going to share just one thing we did. We were looking for a professor search, and we reached out to authors who, I think their names, you might say, were stereotypically female. Not to identify someone's gender based on their name, but we did the exact opposite of anonymizing, right? Like we went through our top journals and we're like, oh wow, I might not know this person, but this is a great article, and so she should apply. And I got the question of like, well, isn't that unfair? Because you're giving preferential treatment to that woman. And okay, that's the question that you're asking. And I think that there's always that tension. Like I was like really blown away by how just omnipresent that tension is. Like I think it's people's gut reaction, and it's this real strong need we have for fairness. Like it's ingrained. Like you've probably all seen that monkey
Yeah.
experiment where they're give this one, maybe it's a chimpanzee, a grape if he touches the lever, and then they give the other guy a grape, and then they give the first guy a grape, and then they give the other guy a piece of celery. And he's like, what? Like, he got a grape, I got celery. And he throws the celery. It's hilarious. Google it if you haven't seen it. It's funny. But it's like really primal, like you want fairness. But this is what Craig's talking about, questioning the way things are. Okay, so I'm in this room are, let's just say 15 people, and maybe 13 of them are men and one's woman. All of us, when we have a job posting, email our friends, right? We have a job opening. I would love for you to come. Statistically speaking, our friends are going to be the same race and gender as we are. So we've had 13 people working to recruit male applicants. Yes, it's true. And then maybe me, I might have some woman friends. And so it's not that you're trying to be unfair, it's that you're trying to make up for built-in biases that exist in the system. And this is just recruitment. Like if you're going to push back on recruitment, these people still have to get the job. It's like, come on. Then the same thing when for the anonymizing assessments. I worked with NASA for years on the Hubble Space Telescope recruitment program for granting. And we removed the names from resumes, and it mitigated and eliminated gender bias, which there had been like small but consistent gender bias for 15 years. And people reacted the same, like, well, this isn't fair. And it's like, or it is, because by removing the names, we've actually made it more fair, right? But it's just the feeling that something's changed. And so you get the gut reaction of like, this isn't, somehow it feels wrong and unfair. And we're so sensitized to that we just kind of tense up around it. So I actually, anytime I hear that during a search, whether it's working with an organization or if it's my own organization, where someone says, we don't want to lower the bar,
Right.
or, but we still want to the best candidate for the job or whatever it might be, those phrases, I'm just like, pause, okay? Like, we have to stop what we're doing. We need to just take a break. And when we get back in the room, we're going to revisit our criteria and remind ourselves that we're selecting people who fit the criteria. Of course, that means we're going to hire the best people for the job. But once you get in that mindset, I think it just spirals out of control. That becomes like almost pro majority group,
Mm-hmm.
mentality. And there was a study, it wasn't done by me, but it was like the best study that showed that when you told people that we specifically want to hire on meritocracy,
Mm-hmm.
versus don't tell them that. We want meritocracy. That word caused people to be more pro man than
Wow.
woman. So these were studies, there's studies where they have like identical resumes. Everyone should get exactly the same ratings, but when you tell someone we just want to select on merit, not diversity, they become like anti-diversity. So when I feel like I can feel that we're going down that path, like just put on the brakes and say, remember the criteria. Here's the criteria. Here's the people. We're going to judge the people against the criteria. We're not going to give people new criteria.
Right.
We're not going to make everyone like, let's just judge each person holistically. Let's go through the steps and like actually try to make a good decision.
Well, and what I love is in terms of the framing of it too, is that you say it early on and throughout, is that we all have biases, we all have things that affect us, and then and that's okay. So it's almost like, hey, that's part of being human. And then the responsibility with that then is understanding what they are and how they may show up. And in your example, again, with people on the anonymizing, and I would imagine a big obstacle to that is kind of that self-serving bias, that ego. Whoa, I could never. I'm the, everybody is those bias. Yes, they're out there. They don't affect me. And
Yes.
I think these are the uncomfortable questions, and being in a position of leadership, they're the ones we must answer in order
Yes.
to have a positive impact. So, um, so,
Absolutely agree.
so I have, I love as well. So building on that, you talk about the DCBA principle, and
Yeah.
so the defined criteria before accepting. So can you share a little bit around that? Because I think that's so brilliant.
Yeah. And I was kind of hinting on that in my last
Yeah.
answer of, another experience that I've had in hiring is that each person kind of brings their own criteria to the decision-making process. Each candidate is kind of judged on a different set of criteria. And, in social psychology studies and experiments where they like really can scrutinize these kinds of things, that's where you get the most bias. Is if you just get to make up any criteria you want, you can always come up with a reason not to hire the person who goes against your gut instinct, and you just
Mhm.
start inventing these new criteria. So the DCBA, it's like ABCD backward, but is define what are the job criteria before you assess a single candidate. And then when you look at the first candidate, you're only going to judge them on the criteria that you've defined.
Mm.
And if down the road, and this is something else I learned from working with NASA, they have these folks who come in, they call them levelers. And like this happens so often, I guess, that they bring in this outside person who sits there and watches decision making. And if you
Mhm.
start to throw in a new criteria and say, oh, well, maybe this person doesn't have as much stats experience,
Mm.
because that wasn't one of the criteria you've been making decisions based on, then they require you to go back and review all of the previous candidates' stat decisions. Because when you introduce the criteria on person 9 and make sure that they have stats experience, you say, oh, they fall short, that woman doesn't have stats experience, then she might have more stats experience than a male counterpart who you just presumed has stat experience or whatever it might be. So you have to judge everyone by the same criteria. And that can be hard. And I can tell you, I was on a search and people said, but what if we have different criteria than each other? And if that's true, and your decision making has adverse impact, meaning like you're not hiring women or people of color or men, if they just have a difference on any protected class, race, gender, religion, age, then according to the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, you would have to demonstrate that your decision criteria have validity. They correlate with some measure of performance, okay? Not like you could be costing your company millions of dollars. These EEO lawsuits are like brutal. You can also Google EEO lawsuits. If everyone's using different criteria, that means you have like your reliability zero. Everyone's using different metrics. It's impossible to have validity because the error between decision makers means there are no criteria. We're all using our own criteria. There's either criteria or not, right? And even if you just said, we're just going to judge, we're going to choose the person who wears the best outfit to this interview, if that had adverse impact against a certain group, you can be in big trouble. So legally, like if you're just going to follow the uniform guidelines for employee selection, is what they're called, you should have criteria that you're always using when making selection decisions. But I used to work for a consulting company that we helped companies that were under consent decree by the EEOC. So they've been sued, they've lost, and now they have to pay a bunch of money and fix their processes. I can certainly tell you, people do not have good processes. And so this is just like one step closer. You should also be doing a job analysis to look at like what knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics are really needed for the job. But at a very, very minimum, you should have criteria that everyone are using. And the more transparent you can be with those criteria, I mean, I think the better, especially for things like promotion. I don't know why it's like a big secret, why we want people to exhibit these characteristics, but we're not going to tell you what they are.
That's right.
And if you do them, you might get promoted or maybe not, because no one knows what they are. I think just like share them. Why not? Let people know, be transparent with what success means to you and how people get promoted.
Well, and I love that. And as you talked about right at the beginning about the great resignation, right? Quiet quitting, all these pieces, and then that transparency that you're discussing, which is so important. Let people know. And we are in a trust chasm right now in terms of, okay, so do I really trust? And you just see it across the board. And what I really appreciate, and I think it's so, and there's so many great examples in the book itself that, I was reading through going, that's fantastic, because it's a statement that you hear all the time about, hey, we believe in fairness, just throw, and then what you do is say, how do you operationalize that? And that's what I love, because we're big on words. Like we'll say a word and then we can have different definitions of that, or it shifts over time. And what I love is you challenge that idea and say, let's operationalize about how we hire, how we promote, what's valued, what's not. So we are in the same, singing from the same songbook behaviorally, and those expectations. And I absolutely love that. Another question from someone who read the book, Allison said, loved your discussion of the White Knight. So, you mind sharing that with, really want to hear, how you came up with that, and share about what that means and the impact.
Yeah, thanks, Allison, for the question. That was my unexpected finding from the book. I really, it's not something that I would have hypothesized. So I was looking at, leaders who are trying to be inclusive. There's certainly people who are just like, I don't care, it's not my thing, but who think they're, that's something that's important to them. And then what stands in their way of being successful. And so I might ask leaders and then interview their team or do a survey on team members to try and figure out, like, where do people go wrong? And that kept coming up. And what it is, the White Knight were leaders who were most often majority group members who had become big allies for diversity and inclusion. And they were really trying to promote it, and were doing so in a way that was like, kind of like maybe a little, I feel like it's really mean saying anything bad about the White Knights, because they're like my favorite people. They're like trying so hard, but they were kind of being like saviors. That's why it's like the white knight here to save the day. And so for one, that if you are a, you know, a man who's really trying to promote gender equality, like first, like kudos, but if you are doing it because women just can't do it on their own, like it sends like a bad message to the women themselves. And there were lots of women who I interviewed who talked about having these bosses along the way who were trying to save them and say, well, we don't need you to work on the weekend because I know you have a family and I'm trying to be gender inclusive. And then their team members are like, well, that's not fair. And would be mad, right? And maybe the women want to be there, like, I don't want to miss this opportunity. Why am I not allowed to come? And so there's kind of two things. It's one, you know, really, if you're going to be promoting gender equity, it needs to be because, like, focus on competence. Like, I want to support women because of this woman is super competent and we haven't given her the opportunities that she has earned, rather than I support women and therefore we should promote Stefanie because she's a woman. Like, because it creates backlash against that woman. And really over the long term, like whoever gets promoted because of their gender, like it's never happened. Although folks might believe that's the case, like it really is an urban legend, I think, that ever works. So these white knights just like kept coming up again and again. And there's two chapters on white knights and what they can do to just kind of pivot to be a little more successful at bringing, you know, supporting the group they're trying to support, diversity, but also I think the kicker is bringing everyone along for the ride. And so if you think of that belonging concept, like we want to build a team. If you create divisiveness on the team where you're anti one group, you know, whether it's the majority group or the non-majority group, you're not building a team. You really want diversity and inclusion to be everyone's business, right? Like we all benefit from it. We're all going to work on this together. And so I think it's like a cultural thing of how do we talk about this and what do we do? And for those white knights, you know, I think the transparency part becomes really, really key, so that because people might suspect that you are promoting this person based on race or gender. So you have to be really clear about your criteria and why that person's the best person for the job.
Well, and thank you. Great answer again. Got multiple just thumbs up on that. And what I think once again, this common thread of the intentions are good, as you say, and pure, which can be a huge stumbling block, you know, in terms of, hey, I'm trying to do good. And then I think what's really powerful, once again, is that then what you challenge us to do throughout is say, okay, so then if that's the intention, not questioning it, so how are you operationalizing that intention? And does the operationalization map the intention? And then if this is who we truly are, and we really want to have that impact where we are inclusifiers, well, then if our behaviors are not having the result that then we have to, as uncomfortable as that can be, we have to shift. That's because our intention is not having the impact. And so I love that, where it's not just you challenge us to say, well, don't stop at your intention. That's wonderful and it's great. Take it to the next level. Really be curious about how you're manifesting that. Is that a fair?
Yes, it's perfect. I mean, I think I'll say for the white knights were the least likely to ever get feedback on how their behavior was not effective, because no one wants to say that, right? Like, unless you hire a coach who's just like paid to give you the tough perspective that you need, that a lot of, you know, the folks who had worked with white knights wouldn't tell them that, because if let's just say you're another man, and I'm going to say it's a man who's being the white knight in this story. If you say, I think you're being a white knight, then the white knight's going to be like, well, you're sexist, right? And no one wants that feedback either. And if you're a woman whose boss is a white knight and you say, you know, I don't think the way you're framing my promotability is really working for me, it's like crushing to that person. You're much more likely to get feedback the other direction, like you're not inclusive to women, like their language is not inclusive, than you are to get inclusive on the white knight. So I get people will email me and say, this blah, blah, here's my story. Do you think I could be a white knight? And I just like, universally, I'm like, if you're asking this question, I'm going to say, I don't know you,
Right.
but read the chapter, because it's so hard to get that feedback.
Well, it's so interesting to say it because in the work that I do and the coaching work that I do, and I see this when there's a real, and so in a different context, yet very similar, the white knight, someone who's, the tensions are great, want to have a wonderful environment, and then, every now and then, or even routinely, they can step on their own rakes and do something that doesn't, and then people are like, oh, Chris is so nice, and I don't want,
I know.
I don't want them to stop being nice and then it's really uncomfortable. So if they haven't asked for that feedback and proactively, hey, this is what the environment I'm trying to build, they can actually unintentionally and feel awful around it. Yet to your point, and I love you highlight that, hey, those well-intentioned may not, again, get the information you would most want to act on. So the time has flown. This is awesome. We're almost at the hour, so I'm really appreciate the discussion and lots of great questions. One of the things that you talked about in the book, and I'd love to get share this with the group, is around one of the really powerful opportunities to create a safe space. Because I've gotten a couple of comments about safety, and how to build safety. You talk about the bystander intervention training and do a
Oh,
great.
yeah.
Can you share a little bit about that and how we can take insights from that and really drive it in so that we can have really safe spaces, inclusive places for important conversation?
Yeah. So, like, I think the onus tends to be placed upon women, women of color, people of color, persons from the LGBTQ community, persons with disabilities, to step up and say, and like, oh, have the courage to say, oh, what you've said or done has not been inclusive to me or my group. And
Mm.
think about how hard that is when it is your group. So you've just been, experienced a microaggression, been attacked, someone has said something that, is harmful to you. So if you think about like your neurological response, you're like hurt, right? You're maybe in fight or flight mode. And then you're supposed to have the courage to approach them. And I say, in the book, with empathy, to say, this may not be what you intended, but I want to tell you about the impact of what you just said, or ask you more about what you meant by this. And I still think that is the reality. Like, a lot of times that's what we'll find. And there's probably other people in that room that day who have also heard the statement. And if they have become, more aware and done some work around what the microaggressions might look like, or they can have empathy enough to put themselves in the situation to know how you might feel if I said, yeah, we do want to hire, and I'm just gonna use woman again, but we do want to hire a woman, but we don't want to lower the bar to hire a woman. How that like might
Right.
be impacting the women in the room. There's people who maybe aren't feeling in flight or fight mode who could step in as bystanders or allies or whatever you want to call it and have that conversation. And particularly if it's with a majority group member and you're in the majority group member, I think sometimes those conversations are just easier. It's easier to hear the message from someone who shares your experiences because you assume they know where you're coming from, or whatever it is. Like, maybe it's something that you used to say, but you've taken the time to learn about this topic. And so not being a white knight and coming in saying you're a sexist, but instead coming in with empathy and saying, I heard this thing. I always ask for permission. Like, can I have the permission to share something that I observed? And then sharing, what you saw and what the impact could be. And then, like, I think, Craig, as you said, like, getting away from, I believe it's not your intention in any way to be harmful. And nonetheless, that's the impact here. And so, because I feel like people's quick gut reaction is like, well, that's not what I meant. And it's like, I totally believe you. I really do. And nonetheless, that's how people in the room feel.
Absolutely. And I think what I love about that and the time that you dedicate within the book, again, it's such a great discussion and provides insight on that, is that so once again, how, because people can observe something happening in front of them and then not really know, well, okay, so what do I do about it? And you share the research around, right, the bystander effect about, hey, if we're in a larger group, the less inclined we are to do anything because it's like, well, it's not my
Yeah,
responsibility, or there's someone else will step in. And I think what's really powerful about what you provide, and you gave a great, again, practical example right now, whereby you said, hey, ask permission. And again, sometimes people go, well, I don't know how to say it, or I'm going to just jump right in. And then what a wonderfully uh, persuasive, impactful question. Hey, can I have permission to share something that, and delivered in that way, that really sets it. So they're accepting that invitation. So those kinds of concrete steps, because to your point as well, a lot of, the intention, and it's necessary, which is again what I love throughout, is that, well, intention's great, and now we have to start, we need to think beyond intention. And we also, and that just doesn't go with how we judge others. We also have to assess our own in a state of more neutrality and see where we are. So absolutely love it.
totally.
This
My good
time,
intentions are not going to keep people from quitting their job.
right,
And I think it is really hard. And I'll say, like, when I've done it, having the note in your back pocket of like, this is what I'm going to say, I think is really helpful. But nonetheless, when I've done it, I'm like hands are shaking. It's terrifying, right? It really does take a ton of courage.
yes,
It'll be over quickly, because the other thing is, like, you don't want to talk about this for an hour, right?
right,
Like, let me tell you something I observed. It's like, okay, we're kind of done. And
right,
they say, well, it was my intention. Like, I definitely understand it wasn't your intention. And nonetheless, it's how people feel. And the thing that predicts, whether people stay in your organization is how they feel, not what you intended to make them feel like. And then you kind of can go,
right.
close out the conversation. We can talk about this again later, but you don't want it to drag on for like, yes, I get it. Okay, thank you for telling me.
Right.
We can end the conversation. So it's still hard nonetheless, but think of how much less hard it is for you to do it than the person who just experienced the microaggression.
Absolutely. And I think what, again, what you're doing is challenge us as we get together as individuals to put up, a bit of a reflection point on our own behavior. And then when we're in a group, once again, say, hey, so how do we tackle this together? There are going to be things that come up. So what do we do? And how do we approach this? And what can we say? And what techniques can we employ? All absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much. Your passion, your expertise, your insight, and your willingness to share phenomenal takeaways for people. This has just meant so much to me, and I know from the comments I'm receiving and the questions, just been great. Any final words before we sign off today? This was awesome.
No, I mean, I think for folks who came or who are watching, like, this is a great step in the right direction to be raising awareness. And then the next step is really translating that awareness into some concrete actions. And so, I really encourage you to set some intentions to, maybe just one thing that you want to do differently or more of or less of. Um, you know, there's so many opportunities to make change that it's almost like, I can't do anything. There's just so many choices. So just like choose one thing and try to do it, and you can always build from there. But like, what better day to start than today?
Love it, and what a perfect way to end in terms of and that intentionality. What's one thing that we can do? What is something that we're really passionate about and that we can go out and take action? And I love, again, admitting my own bias, that throughout you talk about the power of empathy and really connecting and understanding others and taking the time to ask questions and get a sense of what their reality is and not superimposing our own. So this was fantastic. Thank you to everyone who joined, and it was such a pleasure. And look forward to continue the conversation. I'll be sharing the resources that Dr. Johnson mentioned as well, so that you can access them. Thanks so much. It was great to see
Thank
you.
you. This is my pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day.